Well guys, finally getting started on my Ptolemy class conversion. Alright, well, welcome back to another Interested or Monthly. Ready to get started here with my Ptolemy class conversion. The first thing I wanted to share with you is a little bit of an issue I'm having now with the Paragraphics window templates. Now, it's not so much with the templates and the whole concept of opening up windows with this type of template. I think it's really more so of one, me being picky, and two, it's just the scale that we're working with here. It's a 1/1000 scale model, so the windows are pretty small. So I did experiment a little bit with this. Let me show you in this video here. The template is attached to your model, and I'm using now the neck piece that comes with the secondary hull here that we're not using for this conversion. But you can see the template's been taped now to the model kit, and then what I decided on using was this handheld drill. You can use either a pin vise or you can use a Dremel, but the Dremel just turned too fast, at least mine does anyway. And so this one rotated slow enough to allow the drill bit to get through and then to open the rest of it up by first starting now with a 1/4 millimeter drill bit and then moving on to a 0.5 millimeter drill bit. Now the problem that I'm having here, one, is that the windows aren't coming out very clean. I'm just not quite satisfied with the way that they're looking. Second, I've broken a couple of drill bits now, and I only have like a couple of them left here, so and it doesn't surprise me because these drill bits are really very small. I no longer have two size drill bits. I'm just going to use one size now, simply because I broke the others. So what I think I'm going to end up doing here is just opening up a few of them, not really go for opening up all of them. Definitely going to concentrate on the round ones for sure, and maybe open up a rectangular one here or there. But I'm going to rely more on the decals to function as the windows than I am opening them up this way. Moving on now to the rectangular panels that we need to cut open. We've got 4 of them all together, and they do sit at a 45-degree angle from the center. They're a little different in shape from the front to the back, as we've got some skinnier ones here on the front, and then the larger ones will position in the back. In order to mark off the proper location and to mark off the angles here, I just used the markings on my cutting mat, so I found those very useful, and just use a thin Sharpie to mark everything off. I now have the first panel taped into position. Well, this is interesting. Ideally, you want to place this little template here flush up against the edge of the saucer, but when you do that, the rectangular opening we need to make happens to land smack in the middle of this thing. So to avoid that, I'm actually going to place this a little bit more towards the center, and hopefully that placement won't look too odd. Alright, so next I am going to use this UV resin, but before I do that, I'm going to prime this first. But I did want to take a second just to show you a little test I ran with this styrene piece of plastic here. So I took my X-Acto knife, cut an opening of a rectangular shape here into the plastic, and I applied masking tape on one side, and as you can see here, I ended up just filling it in with our UV resin, and I exposed it 3 different times at 60 seconds, and this is how it ended up. So I'm very pleased with the way this is looking. It's nice and flush here with the rest of the surface, so I think it's going to turn out perfect. Okay, ready to move ahead now with filling in the panels with our UV resin, and what I've got applied now on the surface is the base color, which I'm going with. It's a light gray. I used to use Tester's light gray for all of my Starship models, but since that no longer is available, I just chose to use sky gray and white, both from Vallejo, and I just mixed it to my liking. I'd say this is probably a 60-40 mix of white and gray to make this shade. And I have the openings now taped over, so we're ready to go ahead and apply the resin. And I have this box that I've made here with a hole in the middle, and that's so that I can rest my UV lamp on top of there while the resin cures. Alright, so I'm very pleased with the way everything turned out here. A couple things to note. First of all, I ended up with an air bubble here and here in 2 of these windows. and when I took off the tape, I noticed there was a pocket in which the resin did not flow into. So the problem was remedied by just taking some of the resin with a toothpick and filling in those pockets there and curing it. Now, with regard to curing, as you saw, I was using the UV lamp, and it did not cure the resin completely. I went ahead and just followed the instructions as they recommend, really amounted to 3 minutes of exposure, and even with that, you could tell that, especially in some of these areas here where there was a little bit of excess on the underside here, you could tell it was still soft. So that to me meant that the windows or the resin hadn't cured completely all the way through. So I repeated the process, still was the case, and I decided just to take it out to the sun, and after 3 minutes out there it hardened completely. So if you don't want to mess with a UV lamp or don't have one, just use the sun. I'm not sure what the difference is between the lamp I have versus their own brand, but it just didn't do the trick. So just bear that in mind if you're going to use this product. Alright, so what I'm going to do next is put this together with the bottom half temporarily and install some lights within just to kind of see and do a light test and test how much light is actually coming through all our windows and these openings here. So I'll be back in a second with that. Well, after doing the light test, there is an issue here with the windows along the perimeter. Let me kind of walk you through this. I was hoping on getting enough light dispersion from the Mega Sized SMDs that I was installing for those side windows, but that is not the case here. I'm not getting much light dispersion at all. And this has to do with the fact that there's just not enough space between the upper and lower section of the primary hull. So the Mega Sized SMDs are working well to light up the 4 openings I made for those panels that I filled in with UV resin. I did try to remedy this by putting some strip lighting along the windows that I had open, and luckily I didn't open a lot of them to begin with. But for all the trouble it took to squeeze in the strip lighting, it didn't seem to enhance anything. So this is the plan. I'm going to proceed with the 4 Mega Sized SMDs, but to light the upper dome and to provide some illumination for the windows along the lower section of the primary hull, along the center, I'm going to use strip lighting for that. But I'm not going to really stress any further about the windows along the side. In fact, I may end up covering them completely with the decals. I think that's what I'm going to end up doing. I'm of course going to proceed with installing the lights for the running lights, and then of course the strobes, the strobe effect in the container section. That's all going to be coming from the HobbyLink International circuit board, so that should work out well. But I'm just going to be satisfied with what I get from this plan, and again, not worry about the windows along the side there. One other thing I want to let you know about too, before moving on, is I decided to lighten up the base color, and I moved on to Tamiya paints for this instead. I used their flat white along with sky gray and some JN gray to create this base color, which is lighter than the color I had come up with the Vallejo colors. So that is the plan. Let's go ahead and push forward. Alright, so this is how things are looking the morning after having applied the adhesive along the perimeter and these clamps for achieving a nice tight fit. Now just bear with me, I meant to take some video of all the lighting after having installed it, but I did take this picture. Let me kind of go over this real quick. So pretty much what I said I was going to do, I ended up doing the 4 Mega Sized SMDs there for the open panels, and then added the strip lighting for the center area of the saucer. I did add one more Mega Sized SMD to the strip lighting, just glued it right on top of the strip lighting there just to boost up the lighting a bit more. And for the running lights now, there is a piece here that is a clear plastic piece that mounts into the edges of the saucer there, and when they poke out, that's what you see as the running lights. Now, what I decided to do was I actually cut that in half just to make more room between them, because it's just almost like a clip. And so I mounted them into there, and I initially had intended to mount a green and red one for the top, and then some clear ones for the bottom running lights, which are smaller than the top. However, there's not enough room to mount all of that, and rather than taking the chance of light also spilling over from one to the other, I decided just to go with the PICO Sized SMDs for all of this. And actually the spacing is so tight there that the light from the PICO Sized SMD is feeding through the plastic much like it would with fiber optics, so you're getting a nice amount of illumination from each of the running lights on the top and the bottom. Now if you look at the Enterprise The bottom lights are smaller than the top, and that's how the plastic pieces are configured. But the bottom ones are clear while the top ones have the red and green color. So what I'm going to do is just tint the top running lights there with Tamiya red and green paint. Alright, so now for the step I dread the most, and that is covering the seam along the perimeter. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all the clips here as well as the masking tape and get started with that. Okay, well, after quite a bit of work here and just careful sanding, I was able then to finally paint the base color onto the covered seam, and this is something I wouldn't want to repeat anytime soon. But I'm happy with the way it turned out overall. So I'm going to go ahead and give this some time to dry overnight, and we'll check on it in the morning and move on. Alright, well, it's time now to move on to the engines, and the lighting system is going to be pretty simple. We just have this SMD orange chip size light, and I have it now glued to a circular piece that will be inserted right here behind this piece here. And I have taken this Tamiya clear yellow so that we can tone down the orange color. And let me go ahead and put this together and we'll do a quick light test. Alright, so here it is, and I do like the way the Tamiya yellow combines with our orange LED there. Now, to add to this effect, if you recall now, this model has two parts to this Bussard collector. We've got the inner piece here with the fan blades molded into it, and then of course we have the outer dome. And I think to add to our effect here, I'm going to go ahead and frost the outer dome here. Okay, moving on to the tedious process of seam filling. For this, I used Bondo's glazing putty. I always like applying masking tape, which you see here, along each side of the seam to allow for a more precise application. And this also helps to avoid getting unwanted excess around the area. The glazing putty worked well for this, and several applications were done in order to conceal it to my liking. I like Bondo because it dries quickly and is easy to sand. Now remember, when you're doing any sanding, particularly using this stuff here, make sure you're wearing a dust mask. Now these nacelles are being attached inverted, so the etched detailing that is seen just after the Bussard collectors also need to be smoothed over. The instructions also provide guidance in making new holes for the intercoolers, which now have to be placed in this new location. Alright, now it's time to assemble the struts and put the nacelles onto those struts, and as you can see here, we have to do something a little different than when you're building the Enterprise. So the struts come in two halves, and we're supposed to take one of them and discard this middle piece, which was easy enough to do, as you can see here with this saw. Next, you assemble the pieces, and with the tab faced in this direction, you slide it onto the nacelle. Now, it's been a while since I put this model together, but I always remember there was a trick to it. You can't just slide it in. You have to actually turn the nacelle a little bit. And in the process of doing that, I ended up opening up the seam again. So unfortunately, there's a fine little crack here I'm going to have to fill back in. The other thing I did, however, is I created a channel for the wire. The channel is easily created by carefully using the edge of a small metal file, and I just kept at it until the groove is deep enough to accommodate the wire. In order to make it easier for the wire to feed into this, I also created a small opening in the middle of the insertion tab. Now the purpose of this was to try and keep the gap down to a minimum because it will need to be filled in. And as you can see, I also created a similar groove to the other half of the strut to help out as well. Alright, so overall it turned out okay. A little bit touch and go there with those seams. I thought for sure they were going to crack, but it turned out just fine. The hairline crack is hardly visible. I am going to address that once I'm ready to fill in these seams, but I'm just going to give this some time to dry before getting started with that. Alright, what I decided to do to fill in this gap, by the way, was to use Milliput. And this is a two-part putty that it's an epoxy putty that you can mix together in equal parts. And I decided to do that because the gap is so deep that what you do when you apply this stuff is you can just use water to soften it and mold it and shape it. So it looks like it covered really well, and it's now dry enough to sand. So let's go ahead and proceed with that. Alright, well you can see the Milliput did a pretty good job with covering those seams. Again, it was such a big gap that to use the bonding putty that I used for everything else, you'd have to have done that numerous times to get even coverage like this. Now I also filled in the gaps in between here, between the struts and the nacelles where they join. And again, one of my favorite tools for doing that is this stuff here, this plastic putty. It's not really good for filling any other major seams, but it really is great for filling in these gaps. And as you can see here, this comes with a fine tip that allows you to apply the plastic putty into these tight corners, and then you simply wipe it away with a wet Q-tip. Now the one trick about this is that if you do not clear this away after using the putty, it will harden inside this needle. So the best way to clear it out is either use compressed air, put the tube here and just blow the stuff out, or you can just set your airbrush on about 40 psi and do a quick burst of air and it will clear this needle out. Either way, you just want to make sure that is clear in between applications, otherwise this will get clogged up. Okay, well I'm going to go ahead and end part 1 here. As I was editing the video, I realized we're already up to 16 minutes, so rather than making this video too long, I'm going to go ahead and split it here. Before I go, one thing I wanted to mention is leaving some links below as usual. Some are to Evan's designs, so if you're interested in using some of the LEDs that I've gotten for this project, you can follow those links to there. And bear in mind, I always get a little bit of something there if you purchase through those links to help support the channel, so I do appreciate that. Now, one other thing I wanted to leave you with is I'm leaving a link now below to a video that was posted through Sci-Fi Annecy, HobbyLink International. Kenny Conklin had posted this video a while back, and what it goes over are some specific issues with the Polar Lights 1000 Enterprise kit, which you'll find helpful whether you're building it this way or just building the Enterprise. Some very good hints. I didn't build too much on them in the video because I figured I'm going to link you there, but it goes over some of the little things about this kit that if you follow his instructions will make it a bit easier to assemble. Alright, so we have the primary hull and the nacelles assembled with the lights installed. So what's left now with the ship is to put everything else together, hook it up to the neck, and then install the nacelles together with all of that. We've got the decal application, some final painting details with the nacelles also. But then after that I'm going to move on to the container, wrap up the lighting there, and hook everything into that HobbyLink International circuit board, so we're looking forward to doing that. And of course I have work to do on the stand. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me here on my YouTube channel or at interruptedmodeler@gmail.com. I am well underway with part 2, hoping to have a majority or most of this project done by this weekend and have the video up by next weekend. So thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.